Monday, August 24th, PVC meeting. We've got three agenda items. The approval of the minutes in a second with a quorum. We got the public safety, then we have the school master plan and the school ventilation task force. So as we're used to these meetings now, I think we're pretty clear in terms of it's recorded. We'll have to have a little bit of discipline and questioning as we go through to make sure all voices are heard. We have to start the approve the minutes. We do have a quorum: George, Richard, Irwin, Jean, and myself. That's enough. I don't see any other members. I know Roy couldn't make it. I don't know about Natasha, Catherine.
I did not hear from Natasha.
Okay, so hopefully they'll join. Okay, great. So with the last meeting minutes been issued to the committee and reviewed, I hope, by everybody, do I hear a motion to approve the last meeting minutes?
I'll vote to approve.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Ask them for the committee.
Second.
Thank you, Irwin. All right, great. Thanks, George, Irwin. All right, super. Any questions? No questions. Hearing coming to a vote. Again, virtual meeting, have to do a roll call. George?
Yes.
Richard?
Aye.
Irwin?
Aye.
Jean?
Aye.
Stewart, chair, aye. Okay, great. That takes care of the approve the minutes. The next agenda item is the public safety. This is an interim update. This is not a full update. I asked Steve if we could just, I think under the circumstances where we are, I think it makes sense every meeting until such that we just get it between the major updates, just get an update relative to the key items. The soils are obviously the big piece, the COVID, and then also from a budget contingency ACL perspective, if we can just get the interim. So this next agenda item is that, if I could, Steve and Ken.
Was there anybody from Consigli or KBA that's on the
Steve,
meeting?
they're in the waiting room because both Miles and Keith were going to join.
Okay, I'll bring him in.
Oh, I see. I better I'll open the participants. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I was gonna start by just giving an update on the project itself. We've moved into the fire station. They'll be spending their first night in their new home this evening, and the move went smooth but slow. It took a lot longer than they had anticipated. So the movers will be back tomorrow to continue that. We got most of the stuff in, certainly all the stuff they need to be able to stay there and operate out of there. And the dispatch changeover went well. 911 got themselves hooked up about 4 o'clock. They finished that up. And on both the fire and police side, they're both operating off of the new RF system. Next step with the radio system is now to get DPW and the school/EOC squared away, and that will happen over the next 2 or 3 weeks. And DPW has asked our assistance in taking the old antennas off the Birds Hill Water Tower once we get DPW and EOC switched over onto the new system. So that's kind of an update on headquarters and the comm system. Over at Fire Station 2, they're going great guns, trying to get all the foundation work done this week. Don't know that it's going to happen, but it'll be close. And they're anticipating steel the 3rd week of September, and they're still on track with that. So that's a plus on that end, moving along with that. The soils have all been taken out. The groundwater has been tested and is in for analysis. Might get that back this week. It might be next week. We have a risk assessment meeting scheduled for the week of Labor Day. I believe it's the Thursday of that week, to meet with the LSP and their risk assessment group to figure out what needs to be done now going forward. Are we going to need a beefed up vapor barrier? Are we going to need sub-slab ventilation? All that will get rolled into the whole process, and a lot of it depends also on the DEP regulations and things of that nature. So that's still an unknown that's hanging out there. We do have the soil still at RTS in the containers that needs to go to the spot up in New Hampshire. We finally got that approved the end of last week, so that will be going up. We still don't have the final disposal cost. We got the trucking cost, but we don't have the final disposal cost on that. So that will be forthcoming soon. We have increased the soil removal cost. It went up about $225,000. That was due to more soil coming out than we had anticipated. And also part and parcel to that is what you take out, we've got to put back in. And that's clean soil that needs to be trucked in and used for backfill. So the amount we took out was probably 75% more than we originally anticipated. We had to go deeper, we had to go wider. So that tallied up to about an extra $225,000. The total was a little bit of a surprise, but as we said all along, we weren't going to know what it was going to be and how much it was going to be till we got it all out. So that in a nutshell is where we are on that end, schedule, etc. So I'll open it up. Anyone's got any questions?
Yeah, just want to make sure. Yeah, I know George, Irwin got questions, but in terms of the budget, just back quickly, could you just confirm your statement on the groundwater testing? That's out for testing, and you expect to get results back when?
Maybe this week.
Oh, okay. All right, fair enough. But in terms of just the interim update, cost, ACL, contingency, any?
I did not. Steve and my conversation last week, I did not do anything on that end.
Okay.
That was going to.
But we know with the
something-
soils increasing 225K, that's an additional 225 on the numbers that we saw last time.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, and we continue, I just want to say, we continue to plug along with additional PCOs that are going to continually degrade the contingency. And on Ken's last contingency report, he was already negative. And what we're proposing to do going forward is to plug in the 1 point, whatever that number is, 1.7, I believe, something in that vicinity, as a holding number, so that when we look at the contingency, we're not looking at negative, we're looking at drawing down what we have asked the selectmen and FinCom in our last discussion to supplement the budget. I think it's a cleaner way and a more clearer way of keeping track of the budget, right? So that's what I'm proposing to do. I have talked it over with Ken, and I think I've talked it over with you, Stu. And I just want to make sure the committee doesn't have any objection to us reporting in that fashion.
Okay. I think it'd be good to get the numbers in the next meeting. Obviously, in the more formal update is review where that is. I think I'm okay with that. So if I could, maybe I'll turn, I know George and Irwin, you had questions. Maybe go to that.
Okay. Shall I go first?
Yes, George.
So I have two questions, one on the contingency and one on the environmental. I'll save the environmental one for later because I think that may be partly answered by Irwin. The budget issue, I'm a little concerned about us not having enough money to make it until the spring town meeting. It seemed like that was indicated during our chairs meeting that we would have enough money to make it. And I'm wondering if the latest numbers still show that. Are we going to have enough money to make it to town meeting so we don't run out? That's my first question regarding the budget, and then I have one on the environmental stuff.
George, the answer is yes. Steve did an analysis, I believe, for the last meeting, but we're lower than his analysis would show through May, but we can still make it. But keep in mind that that's if we were to pay all of the money between now and May. The reality of it is we wouldn't run out of money until the last month of the project if we were $1.7 million short. So we're always going to have the money until the very end of the project. But in terms of keeping, as Stuart has called it, the financial gymnastics, yes, we would still make it to May, and that bottom line of the ACL would nudge zero, but it would still be covered.
Okay.
George, the analysis that was provided last week or 2 weeks ago at the last meeting showed that we actually, even with the encumbered amount on the Consigli contract, because we have an encumbered amount, we don't exceed the outflow of money to what we have appropriated.
Even with this 225,000 increase?
Yes, yep, it's still, because I believe Steve's analysis had 267 shown in May.
So with the 225, we can knock 267 down?
Correct.
I'm confused. That's only 40,000 left.
Right. But the analysis that was done was, can we get through May? Can we get to the May town meeting? And the answer is yes. We can get to the May town meeting without the contingency balance dipping below zero. If, assuming the 1.7 million.
And the run rate that you described at that meeting.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we're still we're running low, but anyway, I trust that you've got the numbers right. I mean,
We are, George, and if I may just add to it, I think that the next meeting we should actually see it on paper again with these numbers and whatever happens between
I
now.
think that would be helpful.
Yes, I think we should. I think that the numbers there, and it's obviously the burn rate and the timing of having to pay the invoices that come in that will determine the ultimate zero. But let's have that conversation in the next meeting when the numbers are updated.
All right. The second question.
Hey, George, if I could jump in just real quick, you'll actually get those numbers this week. Even though the meeting's not for 2 weeks, you get these numbers this week because I'm on vacation next week. So you'll have the numbers the end of this week for what we have at the time, obviously.
Okay.
All right. The next question is regarding the environmental. I heard you say that certain things may occur that might cause us to consider an under slab ventilation system. What would precipitate that? I haven't seen anything yet that would precipitate that we need to do something like we did at Hillside.
It all relies on the DEP standards. And
yeah, but I didn't think we were anywhere close to having a problem like that.
Well, that's what this whole risk assessment is going to show, whether we do or we don't have to go that route.
What have we seen that might cause that at this point?
The fact that we still have tainted soil under the pre-poured foundations, and DEP standards do not allow it within 6 feet of the building, and we actually have it under the building. We could not remove it because it was under the existing wall that had already been poured. So there is a risk there. We're hoping that it's mitigated because it's going to be a small area and we cleared the rest of the area out. But that all depends on how the LSP and their risk assessors determine it. And I'm sure Erwin can speak a lot more intelligently to it than I can.
I would not want to commit to something like that. That would be a huge cost impact over the life of the project, over the life of the the building.
Erwin,
Anyway,
you want to jump in?
George, we might be getting a little bit ahead of things. I don't think it necessarily means a sub-slab ventilation system like occurred at Hillside. It could be a passive barrier, it could be a passive venting system. It doesn't necessarily mean we have an active system operating indefinitely. So I think what Ken is saying, the LSP is going to do an evaluation to see, because DEP is very concerned about air migration into living spaces. So they have to rule out any concerns about migration of volatile contaminants into a building where people will be occupying the building. So I think we just have to wait and see what that evaluation indicates. But I wouldn't jump to the conclusion that it's going to be a sub-slab ventilation system.
Am I correct, Erwin and Ken, that we should hear more the second week of September with the meeting that would allow us to come to some conclusion on that?
We will not have that. We will not have the risk assessment meeting before the next PPBC meeting.
Right. The second week of September, you said the
Correct.
meeting would be.
Correct.
Right.
Actually, the meeting will be that first full week, the week of Labor Day.
So to your point, Erwin, that's really the point at which we learn about it.
Yeah, and if I may just ask another question, unless George, you want to ask me anything further about that?
well, I was hoping we're not going to ever get there, but I didn't know that there was a possibility even.
And we're carrying that money, George. If you look at even the last ACL had money in there for both a beefed up vapor barrier and a sub-slab ventilation system.
Yeah, I think it was a passive system that we were looking at, a passive ventilation system.
Yeah, it's passive in the sense that it's not like Hillside's, but it's active in the sense that we went worst case and put a ventilation fan into it, which may or may not be necessary. It may be just a passive venting, but it's just a matter of sticking a fan on the end. It's not it's the monitoring and the telemetry and everything else that they require, like they have at Hillside.
Well, if there's ever any way of not doing that, I would really like to see it totally passive.
Absolutely. But if you turn around, DEP makes you do it.
I understand that, but
there's not much we can do.
that's why we have the LSP to convince them otherwise.
Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Erwin?
Yeah, I just had another question. Ken, I believe last time they were going to do some preliminary evaluation at the police station to put in some wells or explore the area around where the tank had been removed. Was that done, and do we have any indication about whether there's any problem there?
It was done, and they sniffed it and found nothing.
So that's a positive outcome.
Yes.
Good. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Doesn't mean there's nothing there though, right?
No, it's no guarantee, but it's a good sign. It's better than finding that, sniffing and finding stuff.
Right.
George, we're on a spectrum here from absolutely no problem to an horrendous problem. So I think we're on the lower end of the spectrum right now.
Well, that's good.
What are you saying? It's nothing but up?
I'm saying we're at the lower end of the spectrum.
Okay, all right. Okay, any other questions from the committee? Okay.
I did have one other. Suppose the fire station gets a call to go out. Are you now exiting from the new station?
Yes. Yeah, they had the apparatus. They've got the apparatus in the new station.
Okay.
Dennis can't exit from his office, but they can exit from the station.
That's all right. He can sleep there. But
No,
as long as the fire trucks.
I can tell he's home. He's not trapped in his office. I can tell.
no, I just got home for 5 minutes before this meeting, so today everything went very well. There was a lot of work by a lot of people, and we're very grateful for this day, for sure. Everyone really came through. There's some glitches we have to work out, but they're in there, And God willing, if the alarm goes off, the doors open and they go down the slide and everything works. But
Have you had a first
it
call
appears
yet?
that it will.
Have you had a first call yet?
Yes, yeah, they've gone out a couple of times today. So,
Out of the new spot. Wow.
but it's amazing how much stuff there is to move. And you know, had I known that, we probably would have asked for a bigger building.
Wait a minute, you were the one
Good
that
thing
made
Finance Committee's not here.
I know. The other thing about the size of the building, though, it's so easy to get in and you number your steps on your Fitbit. You just walking back and forth to different places, whereas the old building, you know, it was like 3 steps up to my office, and there you stayed for the rest of the day, more or less. But everybody is really, really excited. Everybody is really, really grateful. It's going to be a big thing. It's a very historic day for our department. We've been in there since 1931, and to move out now into this modern Taj Mahal of a fire station is really exciting. So we're very grateful.
That's great. And for those of you that weren't able to join the walkthrough last week, it was pretty impressive. And you know, take a look. That's great. Okay, I appreciate everybody. We have some voting items, and I would just ask that we do have this, as I said before. I think it's important that we have these interim updates until the soils and the other stuff gets settled, and maybe by September, Steve, we can just go back to the normal course, the regular update, and that's it. But so I appreciate everybody last minute from the project team coming together on this. With that said, got 4 voting items. I'd like to put forth them together unless there's any issue. Put forth 4 invoices. I'll read them out for approval. The first invoice is for Granger picnic tables at $2,421 out of the FF&E budget. An invoice from Milton Cat, the August 2020 generator rental for $2,612.50. That's out of the miscellaneous portion of the budget. The next invoice is the AccuHealth water testing for Fire Station 1 headquarters for $2,033.60. That's in the miscellaneous budget. And then the last invoice is the Commonwealth of Massachusetts Department Fire Services boiler inspection for $100 out of the miscellaneous budget. For those 4 invoices I put forth for approval, do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, George. Any questions?
I had one quick one. The generator, is that going to end soon? Are we finished with that generator?
No, that's the generator at the temp, George. So that's
what?
the generator at the temp station. So that stays
Oh,
until we move back.
temp, oh, I'm sorry, the generator at the temp station. Okay, forget my question.
Okay. All right. I see no raised hands. I don't hear any questions further. We'll go to the vote. We'll go through a roll call. The committee, George?
Yeah, aye.
Richard?
Aye.
Irwin?
Aye.
Gene?
Aye.
Stewart, aye. Chief Condon?
Aye.
Chief Schlittler?
Aye.
Fabulous. Okay. With that, that should conclude the agenda item for the public safety, interim update and invoices. Any last minute things, Ken or Steve?
Quick question for John Schlittler.
Yep.
How are things going in your temporary headquarters?
They're fine. They're doing well. Everything's good. We're starting to settle in and trying to work out the phones and the faxes and the IT, but so far so good. Everything went well with the move and just waiting for 18 months or so.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, George.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. We're now going to switch over to the next agenda item, which is the school
Have a
master.
good night.
And Hank, I believe, and I think Steve Gentile will need to make sure we add the folks for that agenda from the attendees. Looks like Jason, Don, Andrea, Michelle, and then Susan. And once they're all in, I'll turn it over to you, Hank. Got 2 more to go. 1 more to go, and clap, clap. Is Andrea going to switch over, Steve? Okay, great.
Michelle,
Go ahead, Hank.
Michelle needs to unmute herself. Or Jason, are you going to start off, or will Michelle?
No, it's going to be Michelle starting off tonight.
Okay.
Start off, and I'd also like to be able to share my screen as soon as we're set to do that.
And also, Steve, if you could keep your eye open for the superintendent. Dan Gudekanst is running a little late, but he should be on by 7:30.
Okay, no problem. I'll look for him.
So I think everyone received a link. Hopefully you've been able to download it and review it in advance of this discussion. Tonight's discussion will focus on the 2 schools that have the greatest need, which were identified in prior meetings, that being Mitchell and Pollard. They are continuing to work on the other schools that are part of the study, and we'll have similar draft reports sections for those forthcoming. We are still reviewing some of that content internally, but wanted to give this preview prior to the sending out all of that information. You will note tonight, as you will in all the other pieces, that there are capital improvement plan improvements that will need to occur at all schools. And depending on the pathway chosen eventually for the master plan, there will be improvements that will be needed either at Mitchell or at Pollard or both to keep it going until the full renovation and expansion occurs. So with that, Michelle, I think I'll just let you share your screen and dive into it.
Can I just, while she's setting up, Hank, 2 things. One is I don't know if others saw that when the URL, it was a folder structure and it had different pieces. It wasn't one report. So I had to kind of like go through pieces. I don't know if I did it wrong or if anybody had any issues, but there were several folders and you had to sort of piece together which ones were which.
That is correct, Stuart. And the
Okay.
file sizes with the images are quite large.
Yeah.
So
Usually you can download from that site the whole thing into the thing, but or create a PDF that's a smaller web size. But
we can work on that for future.
yeah, I just suggest that for the future. It might be easier, especially from download time and just not having to figure out how to piece it together. But the other thing, thanks. So the other thing is just, Michelle, I noticed when you were talking, it sounded a little muffled. I don't know if the microphone is there or if it's my side.
Can you hear me clearly now?
Is everybody okay with that?
Yeah, you're a little muffled, but
Okay, I'll try to sit a little bit closer to my screen. Does that have any improvement whatsoever?
that's better.
Okay. And I'll try to speak really loud.
Okay, thank you.
You're obviously viewing the cover of the page pre-COVID, as these children are so close together. But, oops. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
With the children on it. But there we go. So tonight, the objective for this presentation is to begin to fold those facility needs into the long-range master plan scenarios that we had presented to you in the past, and to understand the codes and the triggers and how those affect your decision-making process. And then through that, we're going to review those master plan scenarios and take you through some of the steps that we went through to arrive with some of the decisions that we have. And then finally, we'll review the schedule with you. So just a reminder of what the goal was for this project. This was the goal was to determine what the facility needs are and how those needs impact the educational program district-wide. And to do that, we started with looking at the educational space needs. We reviewed the educational program, space utilization of each of the buildings, and the enrollment projections and how those affect each of your buildings. And while we were doing that, and Jason has presented a lot of that information to you in the past, But while we were doing that, we also had a team looking at the physical needs of the building. And that included the structural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and architectural needs of the building. And that is part of the detailed reports that you've been seeing. Now, when we do this, what we like to do is have those buildings that have the greatest physical need actually be the ones that also have the greatest educational space needs, because that makes your path forward very simple. What we found was it wasn't that quite that simple here in Needham. We did expect Mitchell to have a lot of physical and educational needs, and that we've seen through the addition of those modulars that we've been doing. And we knew that Pollard would also have both educational and physical needs because it too has modulars and is an older building. What we didn't expect was what we found at High Rock, and that building actually has a lot of educational needs within the building. And that is made up of the fact that the building is overcrowded by about 90 students currently, and that drives a lot of the educational program. In fact, the building is controlling the schedule. So things like lunch time, lunch is served from 11:15 in the morning to 1 o'clock in the afternoon. There's no space for therapeutic or gross motor teaching. There's a lot of special education spaces that are missing. Things like literacy learning programs are taught in the library because there's no other space for those kinds of programs. So High Rock actually becomes part of our master plan as much as Mitchell and Pollard. So this graph, I think some of you may remember from earlier on. This graph actually shows each of the pieces that we looked at for the building facility needs in the first row of columns there. And then the very last column is the functional use of space. And you'll see obviously that the former Hillside School scores the worst. It's down there at the bottom. But next to that, Mitchell is the next neediest facility across the board. You'll see too that High Rock does very well through all of its facility needs, but it does score poorly with those functional use of space that we just outlined. And Pollard is in fair condition. The yellow is in fair condition for a number of those spaces, but it's not scoring poorly overall in any particular category, but overall the building has a lot of needs. So as we begin to take that and move forward into how to solve these problems, part of what we had done with the working group was to come up with these what-if scenarios. How do we solve these problems for High Rock, Mitchell, and Pollard for both educational programming and facility needs? When we look at just the Pollard and the Mitchell schools in each of these categories, you'll see the dollar amounts here. And this was outlined in those reports that hopefully you've had a chance to take a look at over the weekend. When you take a closer look at this, Pollard is in need of about $40 million worth of work over the course of a 10-year period, and Mitchell in about $25 million worth of work over the course of 10 years. And none of this includes the cost for seismic upgrades. And that's important to understand because that is one of the triggers that we need to talk about. When we talk about those triggers, the first one is the seismic, and it is driven by the percentage of the building that you renovate. So if you were to renovate more than 50% of either the Pollard or the Mitchell school, you would trigger this requirement, and therefore it would increase those costs that we just spoke about. Fire protection, any renovation or addition to these buildings triggers that, and so it becomes something that you would have to work out with the authorities having jurisdiction of as to whether or not you would have to provide sprinklers throughout this entire building. So even the simplest renovation in either building could trigger this, or you could ask for the authorities to let that pass. But the most constraining one is the handicap accessibility. And this is renovations over the course of 3 years that are more than 30% of the fair value of the building. So what does that really mean? Pollard's fair market value is $20 million. So 30% of that is $6 million. And Mitchell's fair market value is $8 million. So 30% of that is about $2.5 million. Those are the amounts that you can spend within a 3-year period without triggering all of those other requirements. And so that is going to play heavily into the decisions that you make going forward. So the options that we had come up with, those 4 options that made it to the final, those included the status quo, which really is a grade configuration. So that keeps Pollard as a 7-8 school, High Rock as a grade 6, and Mitchell as a 5-section newer renovated school. That's the first option. The second would be discontinuing the use of High Rock as a school. So you would be moving kids into the Pollard school with an addition for 6 through 8, and also building a new Mitchell school for 5 sections per grade. Using the High Rock as a 6th elementary school. So again, creating an addition on the Pollard school for 6 through 8, turning the High Rock school into a K through 5 school, and then building a smaller school at the Mitchell site for 3 sections per grade, about 330 students. Or finally, a 2 5 through 8 middle school, which changes the grade configurations across the district. So both Pollard and Newman would become grades 5 through 8. High Rock would become an elementary school, and Mitchell would become a 3-section per grade school, plus take on the pre-K students that were formerly at the Newman school. Those are the 4 scenarios that we had made it to the final. And so what we want to talk about tonight is, how do the capital improvements work into these? How do you sustain the Mitchell and the Pollard schools while you're working your way through this master plan? In that status quo grade configuration, you'll see in the top here where I've added in the master plan, capital improvements into each of these buildings. So in this configuration, you would choose Mitchell as your primary project. And what you would want to do is only put about $1.5 to $2 million into that project, knowing that you would start construction project in 5 years from now. So that would be just enough to sustain it without hitting any of those triggers. But down at Pollard School, you can see here that you're not starting a project until September of 2030, 10 years from now. In order to get that building to last for 10 years and not hit those triggers, you'd be investing about $2 million per year over the course of the 10 years, resulting in about $20 million in capital improvements. And then in the meantime, you'd be adding an addition into the High Rock School, and that's at $16.4 million. And in order to execute the Mitchell School project, you would also have to create temporary facilities, modular buildings, at the cost of about $40.5 million. The duration of that master plan is 139 months, so all the way out here to finally occupying the Pollard School in September of 2032. And again, this is under the fastest scenario where you're submitting to the Massachusetts School Building Authority, you're getting approval, and you're starting construction in 5 years. And based on that scenario with escalation, the cost of that master plan buildings would be about $310.3 million, and your capital improvement investments over the course of the 10 years would be about $21.5 million. In our second scenario, this is where you would discontinue High Rock. Again, we would be looking at investing the $1.5 million into Mitchell because you have to make it last for 5 years. But in this case, you would be choosing Pollard as the first project, where you would be creating the addition on Pollard for the 6 through 8 school. You create that addition of $175.8 million, renovate the High Rock School so that the Mitchell kids could move into it, and then do your construction on the Mitchell School. And in this case, you've reduced the construction of that master plan in half almost, and you've saved about $40 million. And your capital improvement plan is now at 1.5 rather than the 20.5 million as it was in the first plan. Interesting enough, in the third plan, your timeline is the same, but your costs have gone down by another $30 million, and that is reflected specifically with not having to build those modulars for temporary, as a temporary school. So essentially you have the same program going on here where you're building your addition on the Pollard school, investing your capital improvements into the Mitchell to get you to the 2025 year when you can move the kids out into the High Rock school. And then moving forward. And in this case, we would want to discuss with the town which project you would actually want to put forward into the MSBA. So here we're saying the Mitchell project, but you might want to consider the larger project, getting funding with the MSBA to do the larger addition renovation project, and then take on the smaller project by yourself or with the MSBA if they were about to approve that as well. Also, the cost here is also reflects a much smaller school. Instead of building a 5-section school, you're building a 3-section school. And then finally, that last scenario. This one's very difficult. What happens here is because you're not doing a Mitchell project until way out here in 2031, you pretty much have to invest all of that money that we talked about in that original capital improvements to keep this building running. And in doing so, you're likely to trigger all of those code triggers that we spoke about, and then end up starting this construction and renovation much sooner and on the town's dime, much sooner than you had wanted to. You're also investing $2 million into the Pollard School project to renovate this for 5 through 8 school. And if this is your MSBA project, you'd be taking on your own renovations to the Newman School at $108.7 million to renovate that for 5 through 8. You'd be moving kids into the High Rock School, and you'd still need this temporary modular project to move the rest of the students from the Mitchell over to a temporary facility while you're undergoing construction. This is the longest and the most expensive in both total project cost as well as total capital improvement costs, because you are investing all of this and then essentially more. That's the plus sign here, is that you're probably investing more money than that $24.8 million that we've identified into that project. So I hope this helps explain how those capital improvements get folded into the overall plan here. And if you've had some time to review those capital improvements, I'm happy to answer any question that you might have about how we arrived at the 1.5 needs in the $25 million and the $40 million from each of these schools.
I have a question. I mean, I don't see any other hands up. And I heard you say, Michelle, it's okay to ask some questions now. Yep. Okay, so I'll wait for hands to go up. But the question I have is on the temporary ES project. So the housing of the Mitchell, I think the plan before the previous one had that as well. Is that consider, I don't know where we would put that. I don't remember if we even spoke about property that would sit on, but is cost of a property incorporated into those costs? Do we have a location for that? Or was that really on the Mitchell property over by the baseball stuff?
No, we actually assumed that that would more than likely end up down at DeFazio.
DeFazio, okay. I think it might be worth putting a note saying that's the assumption, but.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. I just had that question. Others? Anybody else? I don't see any hands up.
I do have a question.
Go ahead, George.
So I assume that that third option would essentially, you're taking the Pollard School and making it a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade school. Correct?
That's correct.
And then in that scenario, you're leaving the kids in High Rock in the 6th grade until the addition gets built at Pollard. Is there any relocation of students from Pollard during the construction project at Pollard?
No, we assumed that that would be constructed in phases where you could build the addition, swing a grade level into the new addition, renovate another wing, swing those kids around, and renovate the third wing, so that you would be doing a lot of phased constructions while the 7th and 8th graders were in that building.
So you would construct the new addition out back, and then you would move, once you've done that, you'd move some of the 7th and 8th graders that exist at Pollard into that new wing, close off a wing, redo that wing, and then move those kids back, and then move the 6th graders into the combined facility.
That's correct.
And over how long a period of time do you think that would take?
I think we estimated 3 years. Actually, I'm sorry. Yeah, 3 years.
And construction going on year round?
That's correct.
Okay.
And again, this is looking at the best case scenario where you would be welcomed into the MSBA process. Again, theoretically, you would want to go for the MSBA for the Pollard School project because it is the larger project. And assuming that you are welcomed into that project your first year, then you could put the rest of the master plan into action. If that gets delayed by a year or more, you would be looking at increased costs in the capital improvements that you would need at the Mitchell School. So the longer the delay, the more money that you put into the Mitchell School to keep that school going.
And do you have enough space in High Rock to accommodate the Mitchell students being bused there?
It would be a combination of some relocation or redistricting of some students and then moving the remainder students into the Mitchell School. But there are,
the other
maybe
elementary schools.
Jason can talk about this for a moment. There is the opportunity too that you have actually, once you fill up the High Rock School and redistricted the other children, you now have the capacity for all of your students, all of your elementary school students with that one move. What you don't have is flexibility. So you've reached capacity in every single building in the district.
Yeah, let me elaborate on that a little bit, Michelle. So in really crude terms, High Rock is capable of supporting a 3-section elementary school. Mitchell is currently a 4-section elementary school, right? So you would be 1 section short per grade, 6 classrooms short of being able to put all the Mitchell kids into the High Rock facility, which is, why a Mitchell project is still needed. Based on the enrollment forecast and sort of maxing out your class sizes across the district at all grade levels, there is a scenario where you could squeeze into High Rock and the other 4 elementary schools until a Mitchell project could be executed if you needed to. But as Michelle was just alluding to, it would mean no flexibility in terms of class size or in terms of enrollment fluctuations if, for whatever reason, the flattening out of the enrollment forecast doesn't quite happen as expected.
So the enrollment forecasts, do they show decrease in enrollment at Broadmeadow and Mitchell and Elliott?
To varying degrees, yes. But for the elementary district overall, it's a slight uptick over the next few years and then a slow decline over the 15 years of the enrollment forecast.
Okay.
All set, George?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. 2 other questions, Erwin and Susan. I'm not sure who's first, but if I'll just go by the list here. Erwin?
Thank you, Stuart. Michelle, thank you very much for this presentation. I think it's excellent. I have a question on the scenarios where High Rock gets discontinued. Is there any financial benefit back to the town once that building is available? Is that in the analysis anywhere?
We have not done that analysis. We don't know what you would sell it for or what its other uses could be. So that is not included in any of the scenarios that we have here. In the scenario where you do discontinue, you still have to make that $0.3 million investment for that temporary use as swing space. So you're investing money and then you'd be taking the school offline after that.
But it would still be an asset to the town after it's discontinued in some form.
Correct. But any financial gain from that has not been factored into any of our analysis or even in our sort of advantages and disadvantages of the scenarios themselves.
Just cost savings overall on the project because you don't need modulars.
Right, that is a realization for both this scenario and the High Rock as an elementary school scenario, because you're swinging internal to facilities you already have. Exactly right, George.
In the difference between those two scenarios is the size of the new Mitchell school. So when you discontinue, you're building a much larger Mitchell school. You're building 5 sections per grade, 120,000 square feet, and $111 million. And then when you keep it, you're building a much smaller school, 3 sections per grade at approximately $76 million.
Thank you.
Sue?
Thanks, Stuart, and thanks for the presentation. I just have 2 questions. One is building on what George was asking. What is the impact on like the major common areas at Pollard during the renovation and addition? So what would happen with the cafeteria, the auditorium, and the gyms? And is there a need for additional space because of that?
So maybe I can answer that, Michelle. We did a very preliminary square foot analysis based on the existing cafeteria, for example, that theoretically you could accommodate grade 6 with the kitchen and the cafeteria square footage that you have now. The gymnasiums we would assume would stay, mostly because the MSBA guidelines for middle school would actually only have one of those 2. If you were to build it new from scratch and you already have 1 additional gymnasium there. So right now, all of our costs are assuming that there wouldn't be any additions to the auditorium, the cafeteria, or the gymnasium.
So Jason, what I'm trying to get at, but that's actually really helpful also, is would we have access to those spaces during the renovations? So
again, we haven't done a detailed phasing construction analysis, but there may be opportunity, because this is going to be a multi-year phasing, that maybe you try to accomplish some of those community spaces in the summer times. So that you try to minimize the impact or the use of those to access to those by students during the school year.
Okay, that makes sense. And one other question, when you were describing as we transition in those couple of scenarios in order to do a new Mitchell and the elementary school space gets really tight, does that mean that we lose space for our specialties in the various elementary schools? So we move art to a card and music goes somewhere and Spanish, whatever, those kinds of things. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so in our report, we have a table that we've included that documents the sort of minimum number of classrooms needed and the maximum number of classrooms needed. And so by the time this gets built, the enrollment forecast has dropped just enough to where there's 1 or 2 general classroom spaces that may be available. So without doing a super detailed analysis, it's unlikely that you would have it any worse than you have it today. For example, at Broadmeadow or Newman or Elliott, where you've taken, the tech class and converted that to a general classroom. So we don't think it would be any worse than that, but you may actually pick up a few spaces in the early years of that transition because the enrollment has gone down slightly.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Great. I have a question. I don't see any other hands, so I'll jump in with my final question, which is just going back to the High Rock addition of 15,000 square feet. I still can't get my head around. Is there really space to put 15,000 feet on High Rock?
So when we did our test fit of that sewer, where we talked about a lot of different locations, but ultimately where we've speculated about it going is in the detention area just beyond the upper parking lot.
Yeah.
And then it would be 2 stories, essentially 5 classrooms per floor, and that you're going to lose 2 classrooms to provide access to it from the existing building. So part of the challenge with putting an addition at High Rock are those logistics of geographically where does it go and can you actually execute it in that spot.
Right, and I think that and the reason I bring it up is because when we originally renovated High Rock, in the area, oh boy, is it east? I don't know, but in the retention area, we had that whole issue of the trees coming down, and we cleaned it up, and we brought it back to a semblance of area. And now we propose putting a building partially into that area, and I don't know if how much, I don't know if authority is the right word, but how we could do that. Could we just do it, or would we really face some opposition? So I guess I'm just raising the question in that option of doing the High Rock addition, is that I don't think we can underestimate, those challenges of the space as well as would the town accept it or the people nearby accept it.
Yeah, and I think how we're documenting that in our report is we describe it as uncertainty around whether or not it's really feasible or not. It seems to be the best, option that we have at the master plan level. But if the town were really going to act on that, it would need a much higher level of scrutiny with, a fairly high probability that we may not actually be able to put it in that spot.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions from the committee, the group? Okay, I think, Michelle, that's the questions.
Great. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Michelle, before you sign off, maybe you or Jason could also just talk about next steps.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, we have those. Oops. There we go. So our next steps are to complete our draft reports. As Hank had said, we've been issuing the same kind of draft reports that you've been seeing for both the Mitchell and the Pollard, along with the capital improvements. We've been doing that cost estimate. So to complete those for all of the schools. And then I believe we have a presentation to the school committee in mid-September, and a public hearing is on the schedule for early October. And then once that final plan or master plan option has been chosen, we will complete that and include it in our final report in mid-October. So you'll see your final drafts the end of this month, but your final report, which will include the preferred option, will be once it has been voted on in October.
And I will have to discuss further, Stuart, when we want another presentation to this committee. I would think maybe the second meeting in September would be appropriate.
And so it looks like you'll have a draft by the end of this month. So would we not want to meet in 2 weeks to review the draft and any comments from the committee?
I think we could. We have pretty full meetings, as you know, the first meeting in each month. And it, I guess.
And the only reason I'm bringing up, Henry, and I know Hank, is that, and then Dan, I do see your hand up, so I'll get you in a second. It's just, I think, Hank, there's also, in conjunction with the other report that's out there regarding the school administration building, I think that's sitting there, and this one coming from this report coming together with that to help some people make some decisions. And I don't know if we want to tackle that topic. It's a little bit out of this agenda item for this meeting, but I think it does put a little bit of interest and urgency to maybe get that review done for the draft report, and then at least some people have some information to work with from there.
I defer to Dan on that.
Okay. Dan, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, no, the only thing I want to say is that we may, this 10-6 public hearing, we may have to be flexible with that date. And we may have to be flexible with the presentation of the school committee on the 15th. So,
okay.
Meaning that they could be a little later rather than at those times. But I have not seen these dates yet, so I need to review the schedule.
Okay. But Hank, is it doable to get a draft report in the next meeting and get it out so people can respond, or do we need to wait for further? Which would be really I think if I'm not mistaken, we've got a 9/8 meeting and we've got a 9/21 meeting. So either the 9/8 meeting to get the draft, I think we should try and get a draft review by 9/8, because depending on Dan and your schedule and the school committee on 9/15, I think we at least want to do a preliminary on the draft. Then that gets the position for the school committee.
Okay.
Okay.
I think we can target that. And that next for the 9/8, we would focus more on all the other schools rather than repeating these.
Makes sense.
I think that's going to mean that that first meeting in September becomes a substantially larger meeting. Steve, do you have comments on that?
I agree it's going to be a large meeting, and I really think it's helpful if the committee really digs into the report. What I find is that we perhaps don't have enough time for the committee to review these reports. I'd prefer to kick it over to the second meeting.
21st.
Keep the format that we have been using, where we have invoices and heavy consideration of the public safety building.
That's true.
Meeting.
But I think, Steve, I wonder though, in terms of, obviously, Dan, if your school, I guess the question, Steve, and to the committee is, should we not be reviewing a draft and have our input before it goes to school committee?
I don't think that's necessary. I'd like to see the report as soon as possible, and then wait for comments until the 21st, our 2nd September meeting.
21st, okay.
That would make more sense to me.
Yes, and we could also field emails and put together a list of FAQs that come from this committee in advance of the 21st. And likewise, if the committee has general feelings about what you saw tonight and a preferential direction, I think we could certainly discuss that. But Stuart, I really lean on you to see whether you want to go in that direction yet.
Yeah, I mean, let me ask you, George, again, don't you're comfortable, George, and Erwin and Gene and others, Richard as well, that if we don't meet on the draft until the 21st, but it gets presented to the school committee, you're okay with that?
I am. I'd almost like to hear their comments while we're still looking at the draft report. I mean, we're not in a hurry. We're not in a big hurry for each of these, so we can afford to take the time to review it and get our comments and listen to what the school committee. Personally, I plan to listen to the presentation made to the school committee so I could hear the commentary from the school committee on this in the process. I think that would be
Okay.
helpful.
So, and obviously Dan is going to be looking at the schedule, and that may change. So that's fine. So back to your point, Hank, in terms of the next steps. So it's really, we should leverage email, and we should get, when the report's out, we should get a level of communication going and feedback. And then the next meeting on the 8th would be just the other schools anyways, correct?
Yes, and what I would encourage you to do, because we don't want to violate the open meeting laws,
Correct.
is that if you each reply individually to me and not to the full committee, that way I can assemble questions and then distribute those questions prior to the meeting, and maybe with answers to those questions prior to the meeting.
Okay.
So I have an old-fashioned question. I don't know if anyone else had trouble, but in looking at this on the computer, it's very difficult to look at some of these documents, especially the schedule and some of the costs, et cetera. I would love to have a hard copy to look at. And hopefully that's not a strange request, because I think we're looking at issues here that I think will affect the capital plan for this town for the next 20 years. And I think it would be great if I personally could have a hard copy to look at and mark up, and instead of trying to move my screen around so I can see this piece, but I can't see that piece. It's much easier to flip the pages on a hard copy. And on something I think as critical as this, I think I personally would like to see something like that.
I'm going to ask you, Hank, just to, if anybody wants a hard copy, is to reach out to Hank instead of just creating a whole bunch. I think that would make sense, Henry, because Hank, excuse me, is that I've downloaded some of the stuff and I can see it. But I think, George, that's a reasonable ask. I think it's just a question of who would require a hard copy, and maybe I could just ask people to reach out to Hank and request it.
Yes, please do. The other thing we could do, George, is send out hard copies of the 11 by 17s. And what I found is that the size of the print, and this is really a question for Michelle, the size of the print on the some of the CIP is so small that you almost have to enlarge it 200% on your screen in order to read it. And it may be that we want to look at enlarging that text. Or, George, it might be cheaper for the PBBC to buy you a large screen.
I have a large screen, but still, it's not easy to do it. And if anybody says it is, I'd like to talk to them.
I agree totally with George. I had similar problems.
I understand the issues. In fact, I have 2 screens, so that's how I make it work. But I would be happy to take a look at the size of the text once it's printed, and we can do something with the printing ability.
I think it would be helpful if we looked at it and said, what pages need to be blown up? And if you have to blow up to 11 by 17 on some of them, that's great. Otherwise, it makes it harder to really do a good job of reviewing it. And I think this is really a critical time for us as a town to not have everybody have the opportunity to really review it thoroughly.
Okay, great. All right, so I'll leave that action with you, Hank, to sort through. Is there anything else, Hank, schedule-wise or topic-wise?
I think that's it for this topic.
Okay, great.
I might ask Dan to linger a bit for our next topic.
Okay. So I'm going to thank you, Michelle, Jason, Don, folks. Okay, so that brings to conclusion the school master plan agenda topic, and the next agenda topic item is the school ventilation task force. I don't see any other attendees in the attendee list that needs to join. So is this also you, Hank, to take the lead?
Yes, well, both Steve and I, and Dan. As you may be aware, we have been asked, Steve and I have been asked to assist the building maintenance department in recommissioning all of the schools. And what that means is, well, they had initiated that process for the Elliott School about 6 months ago, almost a year ago, actually. And the commissioning agent went through, looked at the systems, identified deficiencies and problems, and then the building maintenance department has outside and inside technicians, but mainly outside technicians that came through and repaired non-operational or fixed various machines, various air handlers, and did some reprogramming. We're now trying to go through that on every school. And we have 2 sets of commissioning agents, RFS, who did the commissioning on the Sunita Williams School and on the high school expansion, is doing recommissioning on the rest of the high school, on Mitchell, and on High Rock. And I'm leading that team. And then Steve Gentile is leading a team with CES, because we had previously hired 2 separate commissioning agents, and they are focusing on Pollard, Broadmeadow, and Newman, and going back and picking up things on the Elliott School. We've gone through the first round of assessment by both of those commissioning agents, have come up with lists of deficiencies associated with each building. And the building maintenance department has initiated repairs, cleaning, and other things. And we are working through those deficiencies. We don't have 6 months to do this. We have a total of less than 6 weeks before schools actually open. So we are trying to prioritize things. The building maintenance department has also been able to get 4 additional technicians from a separate company to aid in this process. But it's really all hands on deck to go through that. And we're making progress. We've been focusing first on Mitchell and Pollard. And I think some of the univents in Mitchell hadn't been cleaned for a number of years. I don't know that I need to share those deficiency lists with you unless Dan feels we should. But we also simultaneously, through the schools, there was a separate study that was done by a professor at the Chan School of Public Health from Harvard. And they looked at 3 rooms in the Pollard, reviewing typical conditions with the unit ventilators and the exhaust fans in those 3 rooms. 1 room had 1 wall of windows, 1 room had 2 walls of windows, and a 3rd room had no windows at all. And they presented their findings to us today. And again, I can share some of that with you if you're interested, but what part of their recommendation was that we actually where a baseline design for a building typically meets ASHRAE standard 62.1, and the standard is about 15 CFM per person, which then translates to about 3 air changes per room per hour. And they are recommending we actually try to not only meet that, but where possible, double that. And they have proven that, at least in those 3 rooms, that in 2 of the rooms, they think they can achieve the base standard or slightly below the base. But as soon as you open a window, you can more than exceed that base standard. Now, of course, you can't leave the windows open all winter. Those are some of the issues we're still studying. And we are jumping around with the commissioning agents and with the technicians on sort of a rolling program where they go through and do cleaning and some initial repairs. Then the commissioning agent comes back, inspects, signs off on it, and then we go to the next level and or next building. And so at the same time, the other thing that is occurring at the buildings, the school department will be renting a series of tents, 20 by 30 tents, that'll be positioned outside of each of the schools so that in good weather, some classes and lunchtime can be held outside. All of the schools, I think you all know, are going back as a hybrid system. And that hybrid, if you hopefully all read the Needham Times, it was pretty well described in the Needham Times, where they have a week on and week off scenario for about 50% of each class. So 50% of the students would come in 1 week, Monday and Tuesday. Wednesday, everybody would be remote, along with those who are not in. And then Thursday and Friday, that same cohort would come back. The following week, the other cohort would come in with a similar schedule. When you're not in the school, you'd be following a remote learning profile. And then there'd be special, certain special education students who might need further educational requirements would be in all the time, every week. And parents could opt out and be totally remote learning. So that describes the hybrid. And then the evaluation and the retro commissioning process that we're going through now will also help the school administration and others modify that as appropriate.
Hank, if I may ask, and Steve, I just, probably naive question, but the purpose of this is just awareness of this activity, or are we being asked to manage and govern this activity?
In that, well, also after we get through this intense period prior to school opening, Steve is going to take over on what could become a full-time position to respond to specific requests. So there'll be ongoing monitoring, and Steve will become one of the key channelers of how to respond rapidly with authority to call in technicians, either town or hired technicians. This committee does not have any separate appropriation. All the appropriations are coming out of the building maintenance department.
Yeah, okay.
And some of that is a separate reimbursable COVID event, but we're not totally tuned into how that money is coming and going. That's all being administered by the the building maintenance department in concert with the school department.
Okay, there's
Yeah.
two questions out there, and then Erwin and George. And before I go there, I just want to make sure that we understand if there's an ask of us that we're setting up for success versus just, awareness. And I want to be fair to Steve, you, and Dan, in other words. So that's why I'm just asking the question. I want to make sure we're clear as a committee what we need to do. So as we go through the questions, maybe we'll answer it or have input. But that's before we close the topic out. I think it makes sense of what the ask is.
If I can, Stuart.
Go ahead, Steve. Yeah, go ahead, Steve.
I want to clarify that. The responsibility for this activity is entirely with the building maintenance department. The purpose of informing you of what's being done is because of the nature of the timing and the resources in the town. Our department has volunteered, let's say, to support the hands-on deck requirement to get this activity completed. And so Hank and Steve have been involved in it. We have not asked that the building committee, there has been no request that the building committee be involved. The purpose of this discussion is to inform you of what's going on with my department, which is basically, a dotted line to your committee. So the purpose was to inform you of that, not to request any action or imply that there was action that the committee had to inject into this process.
Okay, thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I just want to make sure that, I think it is important to know, especially with the projects that we have underway, if you guys are being pulled in a different direction and could impact those projects, I think it is a reasonable transparency to make sure that we have those discussions. So if I may, to the rest of the committee, I'll go through the questions, hands up, is just keep it to the awareness versus trying to dissect this whole thing. But I'll start with you, Erwin.
Yeah, thank you. I just have a question for Hank, and maybe it's in the evaluation by the commissioning agents. But what I didn't hear is any discussion or mention of whether there's going to be filter changes to either MERV 13 or HEPA filters. As we all know, the concern is transmission of the virus indoors through the ventilation system. So is that part of the overall evaluation of the ventilation systems?
Yes, it is. And the building maintenance department has ordered 2 full sets of filters. The standard filter in all of the units is a MERV 8, but they have also ordered MERV 13s for every unit. Some of the units and some of the sizes, they are just not made. They just physically will not fit into some of those locations. But the intent is to try to transition to MERV 13 in as many units as possible.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
All right, thanks, Erwin. George?
I think I understand this, but maybe Dan or Steve or maybe Hank can explain to me. It seems like some of this is required by the COVID-19 situation, but I didn't like the sounds of some of it being, we discovered that, or the commissioning agent discovered that certain things weren't being done that probably should have been done. And I don't want to necessarily discuss this in great detail tonight, but are we in a situation where every few years we have to go in and bring a commissioning agent in to make sure that the building maintenance department is doing what they should do? I'm talking about post COVID-19. It concerns me if that's the case. Did we discover that maintenance wasn't being done Not up to COVID-19. I understand that that has changed a lot of things, but just normal maintenance.
I'll defer to Dan. He has his hand up there.
Thank you, Stuart. Thanks, George. Here's I'm going to give you my perspective. My perspective is the town of Needham does an outstanding job designing, constructing, and building new facilities. But the town of Needham has not paid attention to the maintenance of its buildings for many years. And I hope this is a wake-up call that we will start to do that.
See, this is the discussion, Dan, that we started to have about 2 months or 3 months ago, where we were all very concerned that things were not being done that should have been done. We saw it. We saw it in a number of areas, and we were told to that, you know, it wasn't the right time to discuss it. Well, I think it is the right time to discuss it. I know we have to get things done for school opening, and I understand that. But I really believe that the more we put this off, the more it's going to become an issue over the life of all these projects. I'm sick and tired of designing wonderful buildings that work great, and then a few years later we discover that, whoops, something went wrong. Somebody didn't do what they were supposed to do. And it's absolutely outrageous. And I'm not blaming the people that are now in charge. Many of them probably bust their butt every day, and I understand that. But I'm tired of dealing with that issue. I think we've got to face the reality that something has to change.
And
So
I think
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, and just to clarify, if we go back 3 or 4 months, we talked about the concern of us building these well-designed buildings and turning them over to a maintenance process. And again, it's not a people issue, we don't think. It's an organizational behavior. What we decide to do is invest in the money. Money is tight, but we talked about it 3 or 4 months ago, and I think we will need to bring it back up again, because at the end of the day, these buildings do need care and feeding to avoid ultimately a shorter life cycle. We need to elongate that life cycle. So I agree with you, George. We need to take it up a little bit later, not tonight, but I think it's worth mentioning as you did. And I think we need to stay on top of that on a regular basis. Erwin, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate and build upon what George said. This has been a chronic problem for many years. We've always been faced with this issue of we put all this effort into building new buildings, and then the maintenance kind of doesn't rise to the same level as the design, construction of the building. So this is nothing new, and it's very frustrating that we're still having these discussions.
If I could add, this discussion will go nowhere unless there is a emphasis on the resources needed to make that happen.
That's correct. I agree with you, Steve. That's the
And
big
that's what
issue.
we talked about when we started that discussion 3 or 4 months ago, and we know where the reaction was, and I think we need to revisit that. But just to bring us back to the Steve Gentile, did you have something?
Yeah, I just, and this is something we've talked about in building design and construction, the role of the building management system. This is the computer system that monitors the HVAC equipment. And, you know, building maintenance, they do stuff on a regular basis. They do change the filters, but the building maintenance department is pretty good at management. And that building management system needs a little bit more of a management approach to it. So the software gets updated and that type of thing. And somebody's looking at the machines on the screen on a regular basis and tagging things. So I find it interesting that we, like George was saying, we design these buildings and we have these very sophisticated management systems electronically, but you've got to be looking at them and upgrading them, much like you do any computer software. And that's an area we could participate in a common ground with maintenance department.
Agree. So if I could just, I'm sorry, you all set, Steve?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thanks. Can I pull us back into just this task force topic specifically, Hank, and just, is there anything else we need to cover on it, or?
Well, I think we have found a lengthy list of deficiencies in many buildings. And as we had discussed when we started doing the proprietary system for the structureware, and we had talked about rolling that out from building to building over a series of years, that still needs to happen, but at the same time, the basic review needs to occur. And I really look to the LEED standards that are part of the Sunita Williams building. And they have a whole list of things that have to be done on a 6-month basis and on a 1-year basis. And it's a lot more comprehensive than what's currently happening.
Okay.
So as we look at these other master plan reports that come in and look at the capital improvement costs that are listed there, I think we may need to actually supplement some of those in order to roll out and do replacements as required to bring those other buildings up to a contemporary standard. And Broad Meadow is now approaching 20 years in age.
Wow. Okay, fair enough. I'm going to suggest, Steve Popper, and if you want to comment on it, I'm fine with that, but I think we should revisit this issue later in September. I think we should come back and ask, not particularly as it relates to this task force, because that will continue. I'm talking about the overall issue of our concern that we talked about 3 or 4 months ago, which was we are building these buildings and they're not being taken care of. And it's not an individual issue. It's just, there's a combination of things. And maybe by the end of September, we would have some more insight, Hank, through this and maybe even through the school master plan for us to bring back together a set of data points and evidence that maybe would spur, George, a little bit more activity and discussion about how maybe we can make some changes. But so I'm just suggesting that maybe we make an agenda item at the end of next month.
Okay.
Unless you feel differently, Steve Popper.
No, that's I think we need to, I think it'll be a little while before we come up with a strong consensus on where we as or where you as a committee need to interject your influence on this. So having a discussion, a follow-up discussion on this in the second meeting of September sounds appropriate.
So if I may ask, Catherine, if we could just make a note to have that as an agenda item there. It's a 9/21, I believe, meeting. Yes, 9/21. Okay,
Yep.
Great. Anything else on the, oh, sorry, George, go ahead.
Could I ask,
I got you right
Dan,
here.
are you still on?
Yes.
Dan, what do you, I think this issue is broad enough so that it's not going to be resolved by us making comments, because I know what's going to happen. It's going to be kind of a internal battle between, why are you guys, saying what you're saying? You don't really know what's going on and all that stuff. I think it's a broader issue, an issue that really is going to take a broad group of people looking at all of these issues and asking the tough questions. Do we have the right people in terms of capability, not in terms of name, but in terms of capability to do this sort of maintenance in the future with all the sophistication that we're putting into these buildings? And it's going to take a broad overview of that and get back at the FinCom, select board, school committee level in order to really get people's attention that something very different needs to happen. And I don't think it's going to happen by us making comments and then having the building. We've already seen some of that. We got almost a nasty gram back after the last time we did this a few months ago. And I don't think that accomplishes anything. I think we need to look at it from a much broader perspective, so that it's not taken as a personal affront. Are you there, Dan?
I am. I hear what you're saying, George. I just want to be clear that everybody who's working on building maintenance right now is working 27 hours a day.
I
really trying
understand
to
that.
tackle a lot of issues, and from custodians to our building maintenance director to the analysts in the office, the tradesmen. They're really working. I've seen them work early in the morning, late at night to tackle issues. I agree with Steve. There's a question of resource and structure, and it's a broad and important conversation.
I think I certainly don't want to downgrade what people are doing now, because I'm sure they're busting their butt. And I know that an awful lot of people are doing that for sure. So the timing of when we do this and how we do this is a really sensitive issue. And I'm aware of that. But I think what I'd like to do is have you give some thought to how you think that might happen in the longer term. Maybe it's October or November or December. I don't know when it is, but when the best time is. But I do think we can't afford to wait too much longer. As long as we don't get in the way of getting things done for the school year. I'm talking about doing it afterwards, but
Yeah.
Just the thought of how to go about doing it, I think is really critical.
Yes, and if I may, you want to respond to that, Dan, or? Okay, fine. Thank you. So I agree, George. I think that, and I'm going to go to you, Richard, is that I believe we need to get to a point where there's enough evidence where it speaks to how we need to, what is the cost and what kind of changes could actually help us manage. No question, the building maintenance department and everybody else are working hard, well intended, but I think we have to help change the cost structure to avoid the bigger costs that we're starting to run into because of these buildings and what they require. But anyway, Richard, turn to you to.
Sure. So I really don't have much to add to what's already been said, but if you're looking for concrete examples, as I recall, the high school chiller situation was one that comes to mind as something that was really could have been better maintained, better serviced, such that it might not have led to the expense, an added expense that we ended up having to incur. The bottom line is that I hate to reduce it to these terms, but really dollars speak volumes. And when you start translating lack of optimal maintenance to costs to the town, that's what will get people's attention.
Yeah, I agree. Erwin, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, just to give some historical perspective to what Richard and George have been talking about. This issue came up at town meeting well over 20 years ago. Before, I think we were involved with the first of a series of renovation projects in the high school. Might even have predated PBBC, but the message from town meeting is our buildings need to be maintained. So I think you'll find a receptive ear to this kind of discussion. And it does involve resources, but it's like anything. If you don't maintain things, it's going to cost you more in the long run. And Richard's example illustrates that.
Okay, great. So let's wrap up. Hank?
Yeah, I think that we will confer with Dan once we get buildings open and have a lessons learned and try to filter some of the projected dollar amounts into the capital improvement plan that Ann Galati is putting together, because that's really where the dollars hit town committee and town meeting.
Yep. Great. Okay, thanks. I think I can tell from the committee it's a very important topic and we are all interested. So I think putting it on the 9/21 agenda to create a little bit more focus and see where we are, I think would be very valuable, and see if we can progress it, or at least understand where we are in it, because we're not going to let it go because of the significance that we feel about it, and I think some others do. Okay. Thanks, Hank, for that. We'll close this agenda item out. School Ventilation Task Force. As a committee, we have one voting item, and I just have one closing comment. Dan, did you have a question, or? Oh, okay. Thanks, Dan. I appreciate joining, and thanks to the rest of the school group and the project team. Okay, so from a committee standpoint, we have one voting item for the Mitchell Modular Classrooms, Mike. And I'm going to put forth the invoice for the New Era Technology door access and card reader for $5,730, which is in the tech budget for approval. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Thank you, Richard. Any questions? Hearing none, we'll come to the roll call. George?
Aye.
Richard?
Aye.
Irwin?
Aye.
Jean?
Aye.
Stuart, chair, aye. Okay, great. That takes care of the invoices. The only other sort of closing comment I have is just to make sure that, we are in our last meeting of August. We're going into our September, into the fall. We said at the beginning of this crisis, when we started to move to Zoom, we would review towards the end of the summer. I think we understand where we are. So I think in fairness to our schedules, I recommend that we stay as a Zoom call through September and October, unless something drastically changes, and we can review at the end of September. If there's any comments or concerns, I would just reemphasize we continue this pace with Zoom calls. You guys have from the agenda, there's the 9/8, 9/21 meeting, there's the October 5th, and the October 19th meetings that would be in Zoom. And then we can figure out whether November and December change that pattern. Any concerns, issues from anybody?
There's a meeting in November that's a Tuesday. What is that for?
11/9. No, they're all Mondays, George. 11/9 and 11/23.
How about October?
October is Monday the 10th, or the 5th, and Monday the 19th.
Okay, I have to look at my calendar. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think we had a Tuesday set up earlier this summer because of the town meeting.
Yeah, you were mentioning that the next meeting is September 8th. It's actually September 7th, I believe.
No, that's Labor Day.
That's Labor Day.
Labor Day.
Oh, okay, sorry.
That's the one, George, that maybe you're thinking of is our
No, I
next.
knew about that one, but I
meeting
thought there was one more on Tuesday. Okay.
Okay.
Well, there was one in October because of the special town meeting, which was changed. We were going to meet on October 6th, but since there's no town meeting that day, we changed it back to the 5th.
Yep.
That might be what you're thinking about.
Okay. Is that correct on the
It's on the agenda. Yeah, if
It's
you
on
have
the
the agenda
agenda.
in front of you, George, you'll have the
Okay.
correct dates.
Okay.
Super. Okay. Thank you. Appreciate everybody attending. Have a great rest of the week.
Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.